Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football with you. And should be a fun show. We're looking around the NFC today in this show. We're going to rank the teams, at least the playoff teams. I've got my list kind of goes deeper than that. I think Keith probably does too. We can talk about it. What some of the key additions were to some of these teams, why we think they're going to still be relevant or they're going to drop out. So, and find out where the Seahawks are currently as of almost July 1st, where we think they are in this kind of mix. So how you doing, Keith? Welcome in.
I'm doing good. Another morning recording here. So I got my coffee ready to roll, and it's nice weather out. So we'll be done here soon, and I'll be outside, doing some stuff around the house and all that. How are you surviving the heat down in Arizona?
Yeah, interesting. So this is one of my 2 or 3 mornings a week where I just don't have coffee. Like, I don't even think about it. I don't make it, So I got up early and went out and took advantage of some cooler weather where it was close to 90, but the humidity was jacked up because we had some monsoon thunder and lightning storms last night with some rain. Rained about a quarter inch here. And so it makes everything a little mucky in the mornings, and it's still supposed to be 111, 112 degrees today too. So it's going to be one of those days where you just don't want to go outside. So I made sure I got the chores done early. But yeah, no, I'm doing good. Went up to a mountain cabin this last weekend to escape the heat because it was 117 here over the weekend. Good. And where I was at, it was 87, I think. So it was amazing. It was 66 in the morning. It was perfect. But yeah, so we're in the doldrums of summer officially, with not only weather-wise for me, for the team, for the Seahawks, no real news to report on this time of the year, which is good actually.
Yeah, no news is good news.
Yeah, teams sent all these players away for their quote-unquote summer break, basically to work out on their own until training camp comes, about a 6-week period where you need to keep your nose clean and your head down and not make any noise. And we've been really pretty successful at that since Malik McDowell, right? And before that, it was a long period of time. So I don't want to jinx anything, knock on wood, all that kind of stuff. But Seahawks do a pretty good job on making sure these guys understand the importance of being good.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, let's get into this thing. So the NFC kind of looks like the NFC of last year. I don't think there's going to be really too many big changes amongst this list. Now, there are pundits out there, if you go look and you're really paying attention to what everyone's saying about the Seahawks, the Seahawks can be ranked anywhere from 15 to about 23 in the power rankings, for example, which puts them, if you're ranked 23, you're going to be outside looking in the playoff race in the NFC.
Even in a
diminished.
In a scenario like we have where the AFC has a lot more teams in the upper part and the bottom rungs are loaded with NFC teams, it's still too low. 15 though, in this situation puts you in because you're probably the 5th or 6th best team in the NFC if you're at number 15. So it just depends on who you're looking at, who you're talking to, who you're reading. And it's odd in that the range, it comes down to, what do teams think of Geno Smith? I mean, that's really the end. The guys that are like, all right, he's a above average starter, have the Seahawks higher, and those that are like, he's crap, have him down at 25. And it really, that's where it swings, is it's on Geno Smith. And that's not necessarily like, that is the big question. I think the rest of the team, we kind of know what it is. Maybe the offensive line, but
Well, listen, here's the real deal. So 2 years ago, Geno Smith comes in. He kind of compiles the stats. He's in the MVP conversation the first half of the season. The last half, he completely tails off. But overall, he had a top 10 kind of performance statistically. You fast forward to 2023, he starts slow and really kind of ends slow, doesn't really accumulate those stats, never hit his bonusable categories at all. And if you, excuse me, if you blend those two seasons together, he's probably a top 12 quarterback in the NFL. If you take his age and all those things out of the equation, you just look at his performance. You could kind of make that argument. And statistically, he falls in some of those categories. So this year is really kind of a big year for him, not only for the team, but just for Geno as a player, because he's at one of those spots where they can release him next year if his performance isn't outstanding, and he's not going to carry a huge load on the books as far as dead money. He could earn himself another contract where he could probably get a 3-year deal, similar to the one he just signed a couple of years ago with the Seahawks, and extend his career. So this is one of those moments where it could really go either way for him. Now, what do I expect? I expect him to play well. I expect him to play better in this offense this season than last season, with one exception: the offensive line. The offensive line is going to dictate how well this team does, I think. Now, I think the defense is going to improve. I think even if you just look at schematic improvements, I think the defense improves. And then you take a look at a couple of additions. We kind of brought back the whole thing. If you take Diggs out and you add Jenkins and so forth, it kind of is a wash. But there's a few bonus positions there, including Byron Murphy, that I think make this defense a little better. And then, the scheme, I think the defense is going to be better. The offense, though, last year we were kind of middling. We were like, we should have been a top 10 offense. We were about a top 20 offense, 20th overall, 21st in the league in a lot of different categories.
But the offensive line was the problem. And do you think it's improved?
It could improve. So there's positions in place now, people in place that could improve it. And you add Lucas playing a full 17 game schedule, having Cross maybe make it a slight bump in play. And then you figure out that right guard and center position. I think Oluwatimi is going to get that chance, it looks like, out of camp, and then figure out that right guard spot. And if everyone's kind of stays healthy, that could be a really pretty decent line. But right now, you got to kind of rank it 32nd in the NFL. There's so many questions. Maybe not. New York Giants might have an argument to make, but it's going to be close to the end of the rankings in the NFL as far as competency and how well they play.
I think,
but they have a chance to be top 20.
I think they have a chance to be better than that. Some of that kind of hinges on the rookie. What they're different this year is they have better depth on the line. Last year they had basically three tackles. They ended up playing a fourth for a chunk of the season because of so many injuries. But this year they've actually got Fant there as a legit third. And they didn't have that last year. They just had Forsyth, and now Forsyth is the fourth tackle. At guard, they were stuck rolling with, guys that honestly at times didn't deserve playing time. Now they've got a bunch of options. They have other guys that they can look to if guys get hurt or, if someone plays poorly. Center is the big problem because I think they have one on the roster. I don't understand.
I think it's a bigger problem than.
Honestly, I don't understand why they didn't address that position better. I mean, sure, they like Oluwatimi, but they signed a journeyman backup as the only other center on the roster. Like, it just doesn't make
you're not
sense.
going to have a starting caliber backup center on a roster typically in the NFL. I think that Oluwatimi, they probably looked at the film and were like, yeah, this guy's going to be our starter. We're okay with that. Let's go spend our money elsewhere. And I'm fine with that. I think that works out. My biggest problem, Keith, is that beyond Tomlinson and the two tackles who've kind of, one of them's been injured quite a bit, we don't have a lot of depth that has any playing experience. Now, you mentioned Fant. That's it. Beyond Fant, we really don't have anything at all. There's no proven talent on the offensive line, and you can go through the entire thing, especially at guard and center. So now we have some players like Haynes. I'm expecting him to come in and win that job and play and be good at it. I'm expecting that, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen. He's drafted in the third round for a reason. There's question marks, when you bring a rookie in, you're going to have some obvious mistakes and so forth. So all in all, I expect them to be better, but they could still be bad. And if they are, that's the way the team's going to go, because you need time to throw. Even in Ryan Grubb's offense, where everything's going to kind of be quick and hitting and slants and so forth, that's only to set up the shots, and they're going to take plenty of them. I think that if you remember the way that the Seahawks approached the offense with not Brian Schottenheimer, who was the guy before that. Maybe it was Schottenheimer, where they were taking shots pretty frequently with Russell Wilson. And I expect it to kind of look like that, like underneath stuff, set up, spread them out, and then go boom. And so, but you need time. You need time for those plays to set up, and we'll see how that goes. Okay.
The name you're looking for was Darrell Bevel.
Darrell Bevel. Yeah.
Yep.
Bevel liked it. He liked to get the ball downfield. Okay. So let's get into the NFC. We kind of have these teams ranked, and what we expect overall. And it starts with San Francisco for me.
It has to start with San Francisco.
And we're just talking about the NFC, not the AFC. So we can have that conversation maybe as a bonus conversation at the end, but San Francisco.
Yeah. I mean, they're in that kind of probably the final season of, their window where it's wide open. Yeah.
Final?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because, okay. And here, let me explain that. One, this is like probably the best roster overall in the NFL. Even though they've lost some pieces in their, front seven, and they've got guys coming back off really nasty injuries and that kind of stuff. It's still a fantastic roster, but, Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel may both be gone next year, because one of them was, talked about as being shopped. That was be Deebo, and Ayuk wants a lot of money and more than San Francisco wants to give him. Plus you've got your quarterback who's going to have to get paid, and right now he's making nothing. He was the last pick in the draft. Yeah. I mean, at some point, they're not going to be able to keep this roster together, because
I think that's starting to happen already.
It is.
So I disagree with you a little bit in the idea that this is maybe the best roster in the NFL. I think that they're very close. But I think they've lost a little bit, and I think it proved out a little bit. Plus, Dre Greenlaw is recovering from an Achilles. He's not going to probably start the season. You've still got all the offensive weapons, but they were not great in pass protection last year. They ranked in the 20s in pass protection. That showed some vulnerability to me. I think that showed up against the Chiefs. And one of the reasons why they lost. They also had the 26th run defense efficiency last year. And now Greenlaw's out too. So they did replace some of those, Eric Armstead and Kinlaw are gone, but Malik Collins and Jordan Elliott come in, defensive tackles. So that's, to me, is kind of a wash. I think they're still going to be competitive. I mean, they were 12-5 last year. They went to the Super Bowl. I see them being similar. I just see them being slightly more vulnerable than they were at the beginning of last season. So now they're a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more susceptible to injury, and a little bit more susceptible to maybe a trade to ship out either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk. Ayuk's talking about wanting a contract, and they need to make some decisions. You'd mentioned Brock Purdy being cheap. That's one more season of that, and then they need to make a decision. This could be very complicated for them. Yeah,
this will be year 3, so he'll be going into the final. After this year, he'll be going into the final year of his contract, and that's typically when guys get paid. And so that's why I really do think this is the last year where they are just all in and could very easily represent the NFC in the Super Bowl once again.
Yeah. Now, the team that I really like, that I think can challenge them, not only for the NFC title, as well as one of the best rosters in the NFL, is the Detroit Lions.
Yes.
Now, if you think about this, Keith, so, remember back, say 3 years ago, when we were having similar conversations about NFC teams and what we really liked about Detroit. Nobody was talking about Detroit at that point, but you could see what they were trying to do. Similar, I think, to kind of what Arizona's trying to do right now without the coach. Now, Gannon, I'm not going to rub Gannon the wrong way, but I don't know if he's a Campbell or not. We'll find out. But just in the way that the drafts line up, the way free agency plays out, they cleared the books, prior to last season, and then now this season they've been able to add to it, plus have 10 draft picks. And then next year they look like they're going to be set up again because nobody really expects them to win any more than maybe 7 games this year. So they're going to draft in the top 12, 15 picks again and have a load of picks. But Detroit has done it the right way. They built this team through the draft, and they got lucky with Jared Goff. So they got lucky with Jared Goff.
Is it? I don't know if luck's the right word, because I'd written him off. You'd written him off. The Rams wrote him off. The Rams had wrote him off. But when Detroit made that trade, they said one of the key things that they wanted back in that trade was Goff. They saw something there, and they were going to commit to him, and they were going to fix him. Yeah.
That's great that they said
and
that.
And they did.
But could you possibly predict that he would kind of really turn around and resurrect?
Me?
No.
I have no idea what I didn't see what they were seeing.
They wanted him back because they didn't have anything else.
Yeah, but that contract looked ugly. Why would you want that? I'd rather run something else out there.
That's true.
But they have gone about this in a way where they've protected him. They've built up his confidence. They kind of fixed some of the footwork and mechanical things, and they got him back to being the guy that the Rams thought they were drafting number 1 overall. And he has been significantly better in Detroit than he was ever with the Rams. And honestly, okay, you want to call it luck? Sure. I think that in the end, like they haven't made any play to replace him.
They built an offense specifically around him.
Yes.
That would accentuate everything that he does well and reduce or diminish what he doesn't do well. And it's worked out splendidly for them, really. I mean, they've invested in their offensive line, and I just think that they've invested in their skill players, everything around the quarterback, really, and really done a really nice job on offense. I mean, splendid job. Like they're one of the top 5 offenses in the league. Their defense is what's kind of held them back, which is surprising to me a little bit. But they've really done a great job investing, especially this offseason. They allowed the 3rd most points per game of any playoff team last year at 23.2, nearly as poor as Seattle. But they traded for Carlton Davis. They signed Amik Robertson. They got Terry and Arnold and Ennis Rickshaw in the first 2 rounds.
Corner was their big weakness coming into the draft, and they got 2 of the best 7
Yes.
Maybe even the best 6 corners in the draft.
Yes.
You've got an instant starter and,
yes.
An instant number
Maybe
3.
2. Yeah, right. And DJ signed tackle DJ Reader, which I loved. I was hoping Seattle would sign him. They signed him. Marcus Davenport is kind of coming to be their edge guy. So now they can be. Aaron Glenn, their defensive coordinator, is a guy that likes to be really aggressive, and they haven't been able to. Like he's kind of been. I need to keep basically playing even defense to make sure that teams just really don't run over them. But he likes to play man, and he likes to be aggressive with the blitz. And now they have all the pieces in place to be able to do it. So I see them as challenging this year, the 49ers for that top seed.
And also they, like, looking at schedules, they could very well be the number 1 seed going into the playoffs. And that's not to say that the roster is better or whatever, but it's all about who they play. And I really like Detroit. Detroit is I agree with you. My number 2, I think that might be the second best roster overall in the NFL. Maybe Baltimore would be right in there with them, but
I mean, Kansas City is a good roster too, and of course Andy Reid.
Well, yeah, Kansas City is. I mean, it's not a bad roster. It's a great roster. It's not as good over top to bottom as these other teams. But what they've got
how did they win the Super Bowl?
They've got the best quarterback. Like that's how. I mean, that's a great equalizer. They've got the league's best quarterback,
isn't it? Right.
And
right.
It doesn't. Yeah. It comes down to like that it's going to make a big difference. It just really is. Like they're just they're it's just a different set of rules because they got Andy Reid and they got Patrick Mahomes. So yeah, their roster isn't as solid top to bottom, but it's good where it needs to be.
Yeah. So sticking with the NFC, this is where, for me, the whole thing kind of breaks down a little bit, and you have teams that are flawed. Like you can say the top 2 teams have less flaws than any other team in the NFC, if you want to look at it that way. Now you start to get really kind of open wounds, open flaws, where you're trying to figure out where teams fall. And to be completely honest, there's like between the 3rd seed in the NFC and the 7th seed, the gap is fairly close, where you could see a team rise up or a certain team fall back. One of the examples is the Philadelphia Eagles for me, who I've got as my 3rd seed. They reached the NFC wildcard round last year. They were 11-6, but they should have been like 14-3. So they lost significant. They just
fell apart down the stretch.
And I'm not sure what happened.
Well, there's been some talk about that it might be their coach. And I'm worried about that overall. But when I look at the roster, I don't see any reason here not to have them, to pick them to win that division and to be the 3 seed in the conference. The roster is just solid, and I loved getting Cooper DeJean in the draft, which they desperately needed. They also got a couple of guys that you and I really liked in Will Shipley and Jeremiah Trotter in the draft. And I mean, they drafted really well. They just continue to reload. It's a good front office.
Not only Will Shipley, but they also got Saquon Barkley to be their lead back as well. So that may pay off for them. I like the roster. They continue to kind of remold that thing. Jason Kelson and Fletcher Cox aren't going to be there, but they need to kind of figure out, who's going to replace those guys. But I think they added enough, especially on the defensive side, where it's still a very competitive team, right? And Jalen Hurts is there, and they've got the offense and defensive coordinators that are kind of coveted. And I think that, but they don't have enough to reach Detroit and the 49ers. So I see this team diminishing long term. Not maybe this season, maybe they get back to 11-6, but I think at 11-6, you're starting to talk about why can't they do more? Why can't they make that jump? And I just don't see it for these guys.
I could see them. I could, especially playing in that division where two teams are awful. And so you should get 4 wins right there just from those two teams. And then, I could see them having a better record and all of that. But to me, I have questions about why they fell apart last year. What was the big failure? And there wasn't like a key injury or anything like that. It just, all of a sudden they just didn't play well. Mm-hmm. And that scares me. And so I almost didn't put them here. I debated whether to put them or the team that I have at number 5. And the only reason 3 and 5 was because I used like the playoff ranking system in order to pick team 4. But between them and Dallas, because I don't know if I can trust Philadelphia right now after last year. The roster looks great. I like the roster.
Yeah, I think they lost their identity a little bit. I think their coaching staff failed. And they lost their mojo. They lost their confidence. You could, when Seattle played them, Seattle was really in no position to beat the Philadelphia Eagles on the schedule when you looked at the schedule in September. And by the time they played them in the 1st of December, they were beatable, and we beat them with a backup quarterback.
Yeah.
Lock.
Seattle was not a good team last year.
No. Yeah. So which team is going to show up? I mean, you could see that they would make the playoffs, but they were going to be one and done, which was true. Okay. So the next team for me is kind of an up and coming team. You could put the Dallas Cowboys here. I did not. I put the Green Bay Packers here. Dallas Cowboys.
I have Green Bay right after them.
Dallas Cowboys were 12-5 last year and also reached the NFC wildcard round. Honestly, the only reason that I didn't put Dallas here is my bias. I do not like Dallas. I don't like the Packers either. But yeah. I thought that the Packers were kind of a team that you could kind of sort of like, because Jordan Love is really had a great first season as a quarterback, showed that he belonged, and I think that they build now around him. They added Josh Jacobs in free agency to pound the ball. Keith, I'm telling you, it's one of my favorite backs in the NFL. And then they still have A.J. Dillon, Marshawn Lloyd from they drafted. So really, I think their running back room looks amazing to me. And
what did you think of the Jordan Morgan pick in the draft?
That's the offensive tackle.
Yeah, the offensive tackle without great length.
So is he going to play tackle in the NFL?
I think
that was always the question.
I think he starts there, but I don't know if he ends there. But he was a first round pick, and a first round pick for a guy that isn't the road grader that you want at guard, and he doesn't have the length that you want at tackle. It's kind of not a great fit. But they were so desperate at tackle, they had to get one, and he was the best on the board at the time. I don't know. I'm concerned with their offensive line.
Yeah,
it's not as bad as Seattle.
That is the one area in their team.
Yeah,
yeah. Because if Elgton Jenkins goes down, what do you have?
Yeah,
like, do they even have enough to get out of the NFC North? I think that, to me, if Minnesota has any sort of year, Chicago comes on, and then Detroit is going to be Detroit. Mm-hmm. Green Bay could find themselves outside looking in. because
yeah, I mean,
it's tough. Now you say, well, the NFC is kind of diminished as a whole. And so there should be a spot for Green Bay. Yeah, I think there is a spot for Green Bay. And I don't see Chicago and Minnesota being ready to challenge this season.
No,
they're going to be the second team in that division to kind of get into the playoffs. And we'll see what happens after that.
Yeah. So before we talk about Dallas, since I did this in playoff seeding, my number 4 team was Tampa, which is not the 4th best team in the NFC.
Yeah.
They might be the 11th best team in the NFC.
That's basically where I had them.
But they are, I think, the clear winner of that division. And so they're going to get into the playoffs.
Yeah.
And so, but are they good?
Yeah. That's a great question. I mean, they signed Jalen McMillan. So, they drafted Jalen McMillan at wide receiver. Everyone's familiar with that. Graham Barton, one of our favorite players in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
They selected to kind of shore up the offensive line a little bit. Bucky Irving from Oregon at running back in the 4th round for them. But the same players are back. I mean, Levante David is back. The kind of the core that got him to the Super Bowl on the defensive side of the ball is kind of still there-ish. Baker Mayfield's going to be the guy. Mike Evans,
See, and I think that's what holds them back.
Really? I think Baker Mayfield turned out to be okay for them.
No.
Like, it seemed like, I mean, he's at 4,000.
Mayfield feels like a poor man's Geno Smith. And Geno Smith
you were going to say
not...
seems like a poor man's Sam Hell for a second there. I was going to crack
up. And Geno Smith isn't like, there's a lot of questions on whether, he can lead a team. No matter how good the roster is, to a Super Bowl. And I think that, Mayfield isn't as bad as he looked in Cleveland, but he's not an elite player. He's an adequate player. And are you going to roll with that on, for a playoff team? I don't know.
Also, they heavily, invested into their safety. Now I just lost his name, Wingfield, which I really like coming out of the draft. I didn't rank them the same way that you ranked them. I just did them in order, didn't really pay attention to the playoffs. That makes sense, though, that they're going to be the essentially the 4th seed in the NFC, given their ability to win the South, which is, but it is what it is. I mean, that's
it's
how
going to be
you
a 10-win team that's going to host a 9-win team. Maybe.
I bet.
But they're going to host a game in the playoffs against an 11-win team.
Yeah, I bet they could make the playoffs they did last year with 9 wins in that division, and come away, because I don't see like the Saints. They aren't even ranked in my list here, being a team that could even touch them, really.
Oh no, after the top 8 teams, I just have teams grouped, and the Saints I have in the bottom group.
So let's talk about Carolina, the Dallas Cowboys briefly, if we can. So here's another year with Dak Prescott. And I don't know. I mean, they did draft Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe. I like both those guys.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good ad for them on the offensive line. Ezekiel Elliott came back, but they let Pollard walk. Eric Kendricks is back at the middle linebacker spot. CeeDee Lamb's coming in, but he's also going to have an extension coming up as well. So they'll probably deal Dak Prescott, I would think, and try to move on, because the franchise hasn't gone anywhere with him. And he keeps him hanging around. He keeps him hanging around, 10, 11, 12 wins every year, but they don't seem to be able to build around him. And at some point, he's going to make $55-60 million in this next contract cycle. And at what point do you say, okay, we did our best with Prescott. It's time for us to go in a different direction.
I don't see Dak as the problem.
He's inconsistent. That's a problem, but it's not the problem.
Yeah. I don't see him as, he's not, I don't believe he's the reason why they don't go further in the playoffs. And I don't know. I'm higher on Dak than I think a lot of people are. But that's just me. Overall though, like the defense continues to just look amazing, at some point in the season and then look awful in other parts of the season. The offensive line was in shambles by the end of the year. That's why they drafted two offensive linemen in the first 3 rounds.
I see this team falling apart. So for me, this team's like, if they don't start strong, I think this team gets blown up. And not by the trade deadline, but next year.
You look at like how they lost in the playoffs last year. They lost in the playoffs because the defense didn't show up. And, gave up, 35 points in the first half. And that playoff game. And that's not on Dak. And now you remove Dan Quinn from the equation. And I think this team does take a step back because I don't like the coaching staff. But the roster is still good. I mean, I agree.
The roster is good, but they're going to have to make some serious decisions here in the next 18 months.
I don't know. Do you trust Jerry Jones to make
no, I don't like
decisions?
Jerry Jones. I don't trust him. No, who would?
Yeah.
He hasn't made a good decision since he hired and fired what's his name from the University of Miami, college football.
Jimmy
Johnson. Yeah. Yep. I hated Jimmy Johnson too. So Jimmy Johnson was kind of an arrogant ass as a human and a coach.
Yeah, but
he got it done, right? He figured it out. He got it done. He had a formula. He put it into place. He kind of yelled at his players. He was a iron fist kind of a guy, a jackass, but he got that team to win, and they haven't since he left.
Yeah.
The end.
Yep.
Sorry.
But at the same time, at the beginning of the year, when they're healthy and everything, Dallas is going to win a bunch of games. They're going to be in the playoffs. They may like fall apart down the stretch and basically do what Philadelphia did last year, and be one and done in the playoffs. But they're going to win a bunch of games. So I think they deserve to be on our list of playoff teams because
yes, they're going to be a playoff team. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. Okay, so
at that point,
here's another team I don't like.
I want to say at that point we've got San Francisco, Detroit, Philadelphia, Dallas, Green Bay, Tampa. Yeah. That's 6 out of 7.
Yeah.
Who do you have as the last team making the playoffs?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Now, my rankings are slightly different than yours because I didn't put Tampa in. But now that you put it that way, that could be the way it falls out. And if so, Seattle could be outside looking in. I've got the Rams ahead of Seattle slightly. They just are. They're 10-7. They reached the NFC wildcard round last year. They've got a great coach. They've got they added Jared Verse and Brandon Fisk in the draft to pair with Kobe Turner and Byron Young. Yeah, their main guy's gone now, but they've got a really nice young core. I think coming up. Aaron Donald's gone. I like their offense still. I think there's a good team there. The 49ers are standing in their way, I think, of being better. That our division, I mean, they've got to play everyone twice. And so I think that holds them back slightly, but I still think they get to 10 or 11 wins. And they're my 6th ranked team. Now my 7th ranked team happens to be the Seattle Seahawks. And that's, I think it's fair. I think that's a fair ranking. Now, some, if not most, will have them ranked even further back. Like they'll have the Atlanta Falcons, and we can talk about Atlanta in a minute. I know you want to. They'll have the Atlanta Falcons up above Seattle. I don't know that that's fair or accurate. They might have the Chicago Bears because they're so, high on Caleb Williams that they can't get out of their own way. And they'll have Chicago above Seattle. Now, they did get to 7 wins last year without Caleb Williams, without Keenan Allen, without Rome Odunze. They could seriously make some waves this year if all things work out. If they turn into kind of a Houston kind of a story, which is possible. But, those are the teams that you're looking at. Maybe Minnesota, 7-10 last year, missed the playoffs. Those are kind of the teams that are around Seattle that you can kind of swap with in this ranking. But I've got Seattle as 7 because I think that they're on the rise. Last year, they went 9-8. They missed the playoffs. That's their floor to me this year. Mm-hmm. Honest assessment. That's their floor. That means to me, I think that they earned this ranking. The biggest wild card in the NFC, excuse the pun, I don't mean it in they're a wild card team. They're the biggest question mark, that you have in the NFC as far as their floor and their ceiling. Their ceiling can be actually quite high. I think they could get to 11 wins, maybe 12, but probably, ceiling for me is 11. Mm-hmm. And at 11 wins, you're finishing second in the division, probably. You're going potentially to a division round
11,
kind of
11 wins, you're going
scenario.
To the playoffs. 11
you're going to the playoffs, but I think you can win a playoff game if you have 11 wins. I just think that they have a good chance. And especially, hear me out, if they start okay, but they finish. Like if this team goes 5-1 down the stretch and to get into the playoffs, no team is going to want to face them because Mike McDonald's going to be the head coach, the DC. That means their defense is playing well, their offense is in sync, everything's working. Seattle could be a tough out. Mm-hmm. They could also really not sync up this year, and this might be a growing year. This might be a year where they're just trying to put it all together, but it doesn't completely come together because Mike McDonald doesn't have all the players that he needs or wants to put his vision into place. And so this could be a transition year, but it could also be a surprise year. And that's why I think they're just the biggest question mark for me.
Yeah. I mean, I have Seattle actually in the playoffs as the last wild card team. Basically I had them
over the Rams,
virtually tied with the Rams.
Wow.
The Rams got in last year because they beat Seattle head to head.
You're optimistic.
And the reason why they beat Seattle head to head were because of 2 players, Puka Nacua on offense and Aaron Donald on defense. Aaron Donald's gone. And now we've got a coaching staff that hopefully will be competent enough to slow down guys like Puka Nacua.
Yes. Well, he had an amazing debut in the NFL against us, didn't he?
Yeah. And so I think that, but it wasn't a like, oh my God, they overwhelmed the team and was just better than Seattle. It was Aaron Donald was unstoppable, and on defense, Seattle got out coached.
Yeah.
And you look at the second game where Seattle had the lead the whole game, but couldn't do anything in the second half to move the ball, an extended drive or anything. And honestly, it just comes down to coaching. And I think the Seahawks upgraded at coach. I know they replaced Aaron Donald with a bunch of guys, but nobody dominates the middle the way Aaron Donald did.
Do you see how badly they wanted Byron Murphy in that draft?
Oh my God, I've read so many stories about how they were like, there was anger involved and like they were just
disgust.
Like,
there was disgust.
They tried really hard to move up ahead of Seattle.
Yeah, McVay wanted to move up really bad, and then they tried, but they couldn't. And they were almost desperate enough to move up with Seattle. to try to get into that spot. And their GM said, no, I don't want to deal with John Snyder. And so that was that. And so Sean McVay walked away from that particular conversation prior to the pick in disgust. I can't even remember who they picked. Maybe they ended up picking the first round. I have no idea, but it wasn't Byron Murphy who they really wanted. Because that's exactly who they thought Aaron Donald's replacement was going to be. But they signed they signed Jared Verse. They drafted Jared Verse. That's what they did. And Brandon Fisk. So those are nice consolidation.
But they also traded away. They traded away next year's first round pick to move up for Fisk, didn't they? No, it was next year's second round pick. Never. That's right. But yeah, like it was. They paid a premium to move up to get Fisk.
Yeah. So they're hoping one of those two players can do some of the job. Now, Brandon Fisk is more of the defensive tackle. Jared Verse is going to be on the outside, but it'll take two of those players to do what Aaron Donald could do.
Yeah.
Really?
And that's the thing is you can't replace what Aaron Donald did. And Aaron Donald won games against Seattle during his career, like where he was the difference between winning and losing.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you have them ranked that way. I could see that. I'm not quite ready. I want to see it. So I'm a pretty optimistic, and you've known that from this show for 8 years or whatever. I'm pretty optimistic, but I'm trying to be realistic on my expectations for the Seahawks this year, knowing that how big the coaching change it really is for this team. So I'm going to give them a little bit of grace, but I think that putting them ahead of the Rams preseason is a really interesting take. And I see it. I see that we're close, and I see what your reasoning as far as just being better coached is being the thing that kind of puts them over the top. I just want to see it first.
Top to bottom, I just like Seattle's roster more. It's what it
down
comes
to. And I think that we have an underperforming roster.
We had a massively underperforming roster, which is why a coaching change needed to happen. Let
me ask you this, since we're on the 7th seed, and that's kind of wraps this thing up, even though I've got a ton more to talk about.
Me too.
How do you see yourself moving from, let's just say, January 8th, last game of the season, to this moment, to where you might land the first week of September, as far as how you feel about this team and what your expectations are?
Well, there's still a lot of potential movement. And I think that really comes into where, because there's a lot of question marks, right? And it's not, question marks can be bad. And usually that's used as a negative, but I think with Seattle, there's a lot of question marks because it's simply that we don't know. And I think that getting a chance to see where this coaching staff is leaning and what the decisions that they make and that kind of stuff will give us a better idea of who Seattle is. I'm basing it based on, the roster, how I view the roster, and how does Seattle's roster translate into what the Baltimore Ravens did last year and things like that.
It translates pretty nicely, actually.
It does, minus the middle linebacker. But who knows? That might be something that they're not done with yet.
That's the question mark, right? It's like middle linebacker and interior offensive line.
Yeah.
If those two things go bad, the season goes bad. If those two things go really well, we outperform our expectations.
I don't know if middle linebacker is as much of a linchpin as that, because they're going to play the nickel a lot, which means you're only going to have one middle linebacker in there. And
if Tyrell Dodson can come in and play, I think that we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I'm not so concerned about Baker, because we drafted his backup, and if he's pressed into service, it is what it is. If you only have one player as a weakness on a team, you're okay. If you got three, it's kind of sucky.
And that's the difference. The one player is the middle linebacker, and on defense, but you have three, the entire interior of the offensive line on offense. And so that's why I don't think that middle linebacker is the linchpin, but it is a weakness. and we need to see what the offense is going to do and what Ryan Grubb's system is going to look like and how he's going to address that weakness. And
right. I would have no confidence that Pete Carroll and company could address that weakness last year, or if they were still coaching this year.
Yeah.
They would just be running back the same sort of kind of, well, we do this and we do that, and if it doesn't work, then we do this. It's like, that gives me no confidence whatsoever. At least now I know Mike McDonald is a linebacker guru. Really.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of came up that way. He was a position coach that way. He's focused. His defense are focused that way. And so I'm not terribly worried about it, but the injuries concerns me.
Yeah. So, I mean, so it really comes down to, like I said, I think that top to bottom, I think Seattle's got the better roster. And, when you get rid of the coaching discrepancy, right? Because, the Rams beat Seattle twice last year, and I honestly believe they got out-coached in both those games, and that's the 49ers
out-coached us, right?
Yeah. And so I think that it comes down to you fix some of the schematic coaching things, and the better roster then has to prevail, and that's why I gave it to Seattle. But I debated that for almost as long as we've been on this show talking. Trying to figure out where I wanted to put them before I finally made that decision. Before we get out of this, I want us to talk about Atlanta, because I have zero clue where to put Atlanta in this, because I look at the roster and I see some really nice pieces and some gaping holes. And I don't know whether this is the up and coming roster that I see a lot of, pundits, claiming it is, or whether the $100 million guaranteed that they gave, was it Case Keenum? Kirk Cousins, same idea. Kirk. For an old player that was never great. And then they turned around and drafted a guy at 8 overall that now won't play.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. There could be an internal drama around that, but the Falcons didn't have any quarterback last year that could play. So now they have 2. So that's a nice situation to have, even if something needs to happen, after this season. I think this season, Kirk Cousins is probably the guy. Michael Penix comes in. If anything happens to Kirk, Penix is there, takes over, maybe never gives up the job again, and they got to figure out Kirk Cousins. I don't know. Bijan Robinson is a year into this system and better. Kyle Pitts is there. Kyle Pitts for Kirk Cousins. I think that's a great dump off for him. Rondale Moore is there. Darnell Mooney. I think the offense is a better offense this year.
It's hard.
They were 7-10 last year, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
The defense hasn't changed much. They've got a new defensive coordinator, Jimmy Lake, but they've got the same pieces they had last year. Ruka Ororo is a nice defensive tackle they picked up, and Johnny Newton was still on the board when he picked him up. Now, Ororo had an amazing combine, which elevated him, but he was a workout warrior, not necessarily a great football player, and we'll see how that shakes out, because Johnny Newton was a good football player.
The Jimmy Lake aspect of this I find fascinating too, because he was the Washington coach before Caleb DeBoer. So he was the guy who was awful and got fired, which led to them signing DeBoer, which led to this resurgence of that team and getting to the national title game. Yeah, I find that to be entertaining in a way. So kind of full circle there.
I still think that they struggle with pass rush. I think they still struggle with their back end. Do they have enough cornerback depth? If we had talked a little bit about teams that might inquire with Seattle on Seattle's roster as far as their cornerback depth, and try to either trade for a player or pick one off as soon as the Seahawks make their cuts. And I think this is one of the teams that come shopping, if that's the case, because their depth behind AJ Terrell and so forth, Clark Phillips and Mike Hughes, they just hope that those guys can stay healthy. Because if they don't, they have no secondary really, and so that's the weakness on that team. That's why I think they're lower ranked for me. They're getting some buzz in the press. I mean, there's some love for the Atlanta Falcons if you look around the power rankings and so forth. They're consistently above Seattle. I don't know why. I don't agree with that at all, really. And it's not just because they get Kirk Cousins. He's not the difference maker on any roster. He's a steady presence, but he's not a guy. He's not like an alpha guy that's going to come in and just really take over your franchise.
Is Kirk Cousins better than Geno Smith?
Is Kirk Cousins better than Michael Penix?
No. He's more experienced. He's going to make fewer mistakes, all of that. But is he better? No. Penix is dynamic.
Yeah.
Penix will win you games. Kirk Cousins will avoid losing games.
Bingo.
And that's the difference. And this roster, I would say the roster isn't good enough to have someone who can just not lose games.
How do you feel about the remaining teams are kind of in the mix? The Bears, the Vikings, I have the Buccaneers for, and the Saints basically.
So how
do you feel about that? I want to know how you feel about the Cardinals too. I know we're going to probably
after the Rams, and I said I don't know where Atlanta fits, so I'm just gonna they're not included in any of this groups. I've got a group that are up and coming teams that I think are a year away, but everyone's excited about them, but I think they're too excited about them because of all the rookies, and that would be Chicago, Minnesota, and Arizona. All of those are ascending teams that are on the cusp. But you're going to see in Chicago and Minnesota where it's going to take more time.
Well, at least in Chicago, you're going to start your rookie quarterback right away. In Minnesota, you're going to start Sam Darnold over JJ McCarthy. Because JJ McCarthy just isn't ready. Like that, to me, this is kind of one of the biggest overdrafts, out of the first round. You had that big, huge group of quarterbacks go before pick 12 or whatever. JJ McCarthy was in that group. But here's a kid I really like, but is he ready to go in the NFL? No, he's not. He can't even beat out Sam Darnold. And so they're going to start Sam Darnold, and that's going to hold him back a little bit. McCarthy's going to learn, but he might get a chance to come in, but he's not ready to throw to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson, and it's just, so Minnesota for me is back a ways. They're kind of similar to Tampa Bay for me. And then New Orleans Saints, same sort of thing. I think Derek Carr's there. They've got an okay roster around him, but there's no real excitement there. There's the city of New Orleans is not excited about their team.
Yeah, I don't think they
didn't do anything to improve. Yeah. And Chase, they got Chase Young. I mean, if Chase Young has a transcending moment and he kind of comes on and becomes the player, but you know what? The 49ers brought Chase Young in and gave him an opportunity to kind of be part of their defense in the future and so forth. And he couldn't make it. And so that's two teams that gave up on him.
Yep.
And so I don't see how that's
after that after that group there of teams that I think are ascending. I've got 4 teams that I think are genuinely bad. New Orleans is in that group for me.
Yeah.
Washington and New York are both in that group, and Carolina.
Yes. Yeah. Me. Same.
So
let's talk about the Cardinals just briefly. They had a great draft. I mean, the Cardinals are going to be a team to reckon with here in a couple seasons, maybe even next year. But don't discount them this year. Like, they're one of the teams where I think they're going to surprise some teams with the way that they play. If they play with the same sort of moxie that they played with last year, as far as just giving teams fits because they just played hard. If their coach can get them to play hard again, they've got more talent this year. They had 4 wins last year, but they could have won easily 3 more. I think they could have been 7-win team last year. I could see them getting to 500 this year, or being around that 9-8, 8-9.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I think that's, they drafted really well. I love Marvin Harrison Jr. And adding a legit receiver to that offense is a little bit scary. And overall, like, you look at the roster, and the roster is starting to come together. Now, there's a lot of youth, a lot of young guys, which is great for them going forward. But going into this year with that many guys that are playing, that'll be in their first or second year, you're going to see mistakes. You're going to see them lose games that they shouldn't. You're going to see them win games that they shouldn't. But I think that they are, I don't consider them like really like a sleeper kind of team. I think they're a year away, but they are close.
Yeah,
they really are. I think that Ossenford and Gannon have done a good job of taking what was a terrible roster, and turning it around fairly quickly.
The biggest thing for me is Kyler Murray's turnaround. Like, that kid was a pouty, whiny little football player, and no disrespect to little football players. But he was just not ready to lead that team, and he got hurt. He got the ACL. I thought, okay, that's it for him. He's done. They're probably going to figure out a way to move on. I don't know how, but he's not their guy. And all he did in the offseason while he was injured was work hard at the team facility and show everyone that he was coming in and working hard every day and starting to lead in team meetings and all that kind of stuff. And sure enough, that kid turned it around and ended up being a really decent leader for this team. And so
I was surprised he played. I was surprised he played because he was hurt for most of the year. The team wasn't good. They were headed towards a high draft pick. And why would you bring in this guy that you're married to because of his contract,
right,
and risk him getting hurt again? Yes. But they decided to bring him back and get him on the field, and it paid dividends both for him and the team. And you don't give the credit to Kyler Murray. He's the one who put in the work and all of that. But I wonder how much of it had to do with the coaching change to go away from, one of the worst coaching hires in NFL history to a guy like Gannon, who's competent. How much was he treated differently?
And this wasn't his guy. This is not his guy.
No, it's not. He didn't pick him.
So Kyler Murray had to earn that.
Yeah. So how much of that, like, did the coaching change? I think the coaching change had a big impact on it. But in the end, you got to give the credit to Kyler Murray, who put the work in and got himself back on the field, and didn't just get himself back on the field physically, but you could tell when he came back that he'd been studying, because he was making plays within the offense and not trying to improvise on every play like he was before he got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, like I said, I think a lot of the pundits are underrating Arizona. I've seen them like 28th in the league, and I think that's too low. I think they're going to be up. That's why I have them, in that group as being like just under the Rams. So, being like the 9th seed. Okay. There's only 8 or only 7 teams make the playoffs, but they're going to be one of those teams that's going to be listed as in contention going into the last couple of weeks of the year.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. They're not getting close to the 4 wins that they had last year. They're way better than that. They're going to double that.
Yeah, I think so. And just having a full season of Kyler Murray instead of, a bunch of backups that I mean, the guy that played most of their games before Murray came back, he was on the roster like a week before the first game because he got traded from Cleveland. Like that's how good. Yeah, that's how good their quarterback room was without Murray. That they had to go trade for a backup to come be their starter for the first 8 games.
So this NFC West could be something else. So remember the days where the NFC West was the best division in all of football, and any one of 4 teams could, eke something out. That's what is going to happen here in the next.
I feel like we're a year away from we're a year away from having a 4-horse race that anybody could win. Because I think after this year, the 49ers slide back to the pack, and Seattle and Arizona both take a step forward. And you're looking
we'll see what happens with the Rams. Yeah.
Yeah. You have 4 teams that are relatively equal, not in 2024, but in 2025. And that's going to be fun. The only other division that's similar in the NFC is the North, where you've got Green Bay and Detroit, which are both good teams that should be in the playoffs, but you've got Chicago and Minnesota that are up and coming teams that drafted quarterbacks and are, a year away from really putting it together and making that run.
Fun. The NFC can be relevant again. I mean, we were for a very, very long time. The last 3 years have just been kind of crap, but it'll swing back. Yeah, good show. I wanted to talk about a few other teams. I kind of wanted to dip into the AFC a little bit just to talk about those guys, but no, we don't have to. We don't have time. Fun show. The next show that we do is going to be our epic Q&A and beer tasting show of the year. We do this every year around the July 1st. And this year it happens to be on July 1st. We're going to record that show. I don't know if we're going to do a live show, but we'll have it recorded. And our guest is going to be Dan Viens this year. We haven't had a Q&A show that we've done with the beer tasting with a guest. And it's fitting that Dan comes on. We've been on his show a few times. We haven't had a lot of guests this season. Probably my fault. Sorry, everyone. I just get busy and I don't have time to put it all together, but it'll be nice to have Dan on just for another voice there. We get to ask somebody else questions. He gets to ask us, and then we get 3 more beers in addition to our 3 each that we bring into the show to taste and to talk about. So should be a fun show. Should be a lot of fun.
We're not theming it this time, right? We can just bring in what we want.
Bring in our 3 favorite beers, regardless of type.
Oh no, that's dangerous. Because my 3 favorite beers
are fortified.
Yeah,
so you have to almost have a couple warm-up beers just to get to the favorites.
They're all imperial-ish, and by the end of that show, it may be you and Dan talking, and I'm sleeping under my desk here. So,
yeah, you're doing your moose drool, like literally. Yeah, fun show. Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. Yep. I'm sure that show will go way past where we normally want to be too. This show went long. Lately we've been, for a while there, we had shows where we just literally tried to plan for 30 minutes. And now we're kind of letting it go a little bit, especially in the off season. You just, we're a little loose, but thanks for sticking with us, everyone. We appreciate you. Find the show on your favorite podcast platform and our YouTube channel, Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Leave us a comment, recommend us to someone else, and subscribe for sure. That way you get each show into your feed every week. And as we ramp up towards the season, we'll start back with our 2 or 3 shows a week. Right now we're kind of laxing a little bit and doing one show now and again. So,
yep. We'll get to, once we get back into training camp, we'll get back to multiple shows a week. But right now, unless something crazy happens, I'd rather do the one long show. So this is more fun.
Yeah, me too. The other we were invited on the Hawk Zone Rundown podcast as well for an August show appearance in a roundtable format. So there'll be, I think, 6 of us fighting for words on a show, which will be interesting. But that should be a lot of fun as well. So that's coming up. And then training camp stuff starts here pretty quickly. I think rookies come in on the 17th of July.
I know.
So just a couple of weeks from this next week. So 3 weeks, essentially, they'll be in camp. That's soon.
Yep.
Fun. We'll get to start talking about real stuff.
I know.
I love it.
Although the rookie week is more about installation and teaching than we don't get to see them do much. But they'll be in, and that'll be interesting.
That'll be fun. All right. Until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWSeahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.